today. Looking forward to 4 more presentations today. Again, you have to have a cell phone with you. Don't forget to turn it off. So you're not, yeah, there was some little beeps coming from the back row there yesterday. Give your attention to this, something I got later. Yes.
You can just call me Jordan.
Well, no, but you get to introduce yourself, so I'm
yeah.
turn it over to you.
All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jordan Ricciardi. I live in Drayton, Massachusetts, and I teach in Andover and have been there for 4 years now. I'd like to walk you through my journey through this program and give you a little bit of insight and explain some of the discoveries that I made along the way. I would like to start by reading an excerpt from a 3rd grade student reflection. He says, weaving, I would say, is a more relaxing way of doing meditation. If you want to, you can completely let go of everything you're thinking and focus on the weave. It is also a great way to release stress and anger and other negative or red feelings. This is an important moment in my journey, and hopefully by the end of my presentation, you will understand why. During my undergrad, I tried several different avenues: fashion design, illustration, and graphic design. I knew almost immediately that none of them were for me as soon as I entered the majors. They were all too narrow. I met with my advisor, who pointed me in the direction of art education. I had always admired my elementary art teacher, Mrs. Rivers, and when I was younger, at daycare, I used to bring all of my materials and teach the other kids art lessons. Once I made the swap to art ed, I got to take classes in a variety of areas, such as mask making, figure drawing, and textile courses, and many others. It allowed me to explore and work with so many different materials. And after doing my student teaching, I knew it was the right fit. When I first came to the New Hampshire Institute, I felt insecure about my application process and my application portfolio at first because all my work was so different. It was all representational, but there was really no theme or no obvious style. I used a variety of mediums, and I felt sort of apologetic about my work because I felt that if I wanted to be in a master program, I needed to concentrate on one medium and make up my mind about what my work should mean or look like. During the first studio, I honed in on my painting skills with acrylics. I created several works that all looked like they belonged together. My artist statement was all about finding beauty in everyday objects and how perspective can change your outlook. It felt very forced and cliche. Although I was okay with the outcome, I had no real attachment to the work. I felt like something was missing. I met Marcus during my first residency. He invited us into his studio, and he starts off by showing us some of his representational landscapes and figures. And then he jumps to this entirely different body of work that almost looks like he captured another world or like another dimension. Right then I realized it was okay to work in different ways in media. He already changed my outlook and I had only just met him. When I started the first residency, I knew I needed to change, or I needed a change from the 15 series. I wasn't sure what direction to go in, so Marcus had seen this picture in my application portfolio and said, how about portraits or self-portraits? And I had never really done a self-portrait before, so I said, why not take a stab at it? During my first self-portrait, I was mainly concerned with technical skill. I wanted to know more about colors, light, and composition, and at the end, again, I was okay with this, but something was still missing. One day, Chris Archer does a presentation on his work and says something that resonated with me. I don't remember the exact wording, but it was about how when you're making art, no one sees you making. Objects just come out of it. Not residue, but kind of. I thought this was an interesting perspective. Artwork as residue or artifacts from this very intimate studio experience. It's ironic that his words stuck with me like this because I had used the saying, art is not about the product, it's about the process, in my own classroom, and it seemed appropriate then, but at this time it started to make more sense to me in my own connection, in my own studio. He had also said something like, bringing your body to a place where it is very present, and something that like made me write that down. As the residency moved into full swing, I looked over at my studio mate, Kellen, who looks like he's having an absolute blast over in his area. He has his headphones in, he's rocking out, he's really engaged, and he's just totally lost in making. And in this moment I thought, I want to make art and enjoy it again. And art has always been an outlet for me, and I've always loved making it. So I started to question what it is that I love about making art. Sean McNiff, everyone's probably so sick of hearing me talk about him, but this was a very pivotal moment for me. It was when he came to do his artist talk. He spoke about art therapy and trusted in the process. He talked about making moves and seeing where they lead you. He said, work big, make movements, and then just the next ones are going to happen. Acts build upon one another. Just move, just do it. So that was like he just saying that to me. And then the hands can solve problems, the mind can't, which also just was music to my ears to hear that. We had a couple of visiting artists before then, and I always jotted down every quote that made sense to me. But at this moment, I wrote down every single word that he said. It was like he took the thoughts out of my head and put them to words. So I went out right away and bought every one of his books. This was a really pivotal moment in my experience here. I had been doing yoga for a couple of years, and I made a connection to art and the way that I felt when I was in my yoga classes. This is yoga on a paddleboard, which is like way better than regular yoga. My yoga instructor had always said, be in the present and rid your brain of all the worries of, for the time being, concentrate on the pose at hand. Sometimes when I make art, I feel relief from everyday life. It's like an escape. It only happens sometimes. Other times it can be stressful. So I started to question what kind of art is therapeutic for me and what kind of art is stressful. I remember this painting in my undergrad. It was an observational figure drawing class. This particular drawing felt like a failure at the time. It wasn't as exact as I normally liked. As I was about to start over, my professor had suggested that I play with it, which didn't really make sense to me at that time. Since I was just going to throw it out anyway, I started to rub paint in areas and throw ink at it. After a while, I began to like it. It's actually become one of my favorite paintings. Loosening up and freeing myself from my own standards and need for perfection was so enjoyable. I felt it came through in this work. I hung it up in my studio, and I kept it there for the entire summers to remind myself to loosen up and to trust the process, like McNiff had said. I went back to self-portraits with a different approach. I brought in all the materials I owned, and I played. I kept the mirror and used my face as a starting point, but then I just experimented with the different materials and different effects that I could get from them. Hi, Jason. When the second weekend workshop hit, I met another professor, Jason. I was still receiving feedback from others who were suggesting that I work with one medium, and Jason told me to push back and do what I needed to do. So this program, he said something to the effect of, this program is a time to be selfish and do what satisfy my own needs. So up until this point, I was still trying to please everyone else. But what Jason said hit home, and I decided to stay true and stick with my experimental needs and love of exploration. As the second year started, I met Jackie, who's our online studio professor. She was making pattern-based abstract works, and after seeing her work and knowing that she was into abstraction, I felt very comfortable with the idea of experimenting with materials and seeing where it leads. somehow it made me feel like she was going to be more accepting or open to this process that I was unfamiliar with, or I was even being hard on myself about. This was one of the first pieces I made during her course. I've always suffered from generalized anxiety disorder, which is when you are consumed with excessive worry about general life circumstances. I understand that many people deal with anxiety at some point in their life, but it has owned most of mine. When listening to others, it seems that anxiety and stress are used interchangeably, yet anxiety is usually irrational. I was in the midst of moving into my first house, planning my wedding, being a new teacher, and taking on this master's program. So you can only imagine what my anxiety was like then. In one of my academic courses, we delved deeper into modern and contemporary art, and we focused on automatism. It made so much sense to me. Automatists work intuitively. Their marks are instinctive. There is no preconceived idea or plan. They are in the moment, which is another yoga connection, and they pull from the subconscious. Sean McNiff describes this feeling best. I experience a participation mystique when I am in sync with my surroundings. Today, we describe these peak moments as being in the zone. It is a time when the chemistry is right, everything fits, the process carries us as we work together with it. All of the time we have spent exercising our creative expression results in the ability to move without self-consciousness. Automatists seem to capture the essence of the artist, and what they produce seems like an artifact or residue from the actual experience or process, which sounded familiar. Chris Archer. I tried to abandon representation for a little while and work in this automatic way. I enjoyed the tactile experience, but the unresolved edges seemed too chaotic for me. This way of working was totally foreign and felt too big of a leap from my traditional style of working. I started to play with shapes and values, and this was a little better because I had more control in the process, had more structure, although I approached it in the same automatic way as the last one. This work gave me the idea to play more with forms, which led me to reliefs. I began to build out of the canvas, and I felt good about this direction. It was not completely unplanned. This piece reminded me of a blooming flower or a blooming onion, but I liked that it resembled something more concrete. I like the control, the repetition of evolving patterns, and craftsmanship. Working near Deanna and seeing her working with all these great materials like acrylics and resin and the Yuko paper that I had never heard of before, and her rubbing alcohol on the canvases and seeing the effects really sparked my interest in continuing to explore. I bought a bunch of supplies and recruited Deanna for a play date out on the porch, and I was especially interested in the resin. This is our out on the porch experience. I tried dunking resin in a little bit of everything and just played around with it. Didn't feel like I had made any actual work to show anybody, but I just, enjoyed the process of learning new materials. I think it was around that time where I received the nickname Jordan Pie Hands from Jason, because and when he first said that, I didn't understand this nickname, but I get it now because I do think of myself as my art style is kind of like a buffet, and I need to try it all. So every once in a while, I walk by the studio and say, "Hey, Pie Hands, what are you working on today?" And this is my studio, and this might be where I got my name from. I had everything in the studio, from pool noodles to canvases to wood to fabric, my sewing materials, spray paint, just everything. And I felt like it was important for whenever ideas came about, for me to have them available and ready for play. Sometimes the materials that I use influence my ideas, and sometimes the ideas influence the materials. These two pieces, well, the first one on your left came first, and it was sparked by or influenced by the piece that was the relief that you saw earlier. And I grabbed my sewing material, started cutting out this great utility fabric and kind of puzzle piecing them together. There was something about this repetitive motion and the puzzle piecing of the trying to figure out where they fit that was very therapeutic, and I started to realize that it was mitigating my anxiety. So I saw this connection, or I finally was starting to figure out what it is that I needed making. As much as I loved this and I went on to make another piece of it, I was ready for new materials. New materials called my name. But before I go on to the next thing, I have to give some credit to Marcus because I think he inspired the pieces that happened beforehand. This one flower that I had seen in his studio just stuck with me. So I think that subconsciously it inspired the other pieces. Visiting artist Richard Ricciardi says painting is a form of autobiography, whether we intend it or not. Not just painting though, art making. And I think this is where my interest in self-investigation and identity beyond self-portraits stem from. A few tips I took from Richard. Have several pictures going on so that you don't put too much pressure on just one. And two very different kinds of art projects may constructively inform each other. It wasn't until after working on my thesis that I realized how everyone around me was influencing my decisions and new directions. So this next piece, I started using new material, and the resin kind of came back in. I found a better use for the resin after we had our little experimentation day. And I was really nervous about putting the resin down on this final piece, but something about the risk was exciting. After this self-portrait, it sparked another type of self-portrait. I started to cast my own body, and I was using plaster in my classroom, so I was curious about it and wanted to do it myself. So I really got into the materials and enjoyed this process. I used to take stained glass courses, so I was comfortable with glass in a way. I went to Spain and saw Gaudí's mosaics, came back to my classroom and wanted to introduce them to Gaudí, my students to Gaudí, and had them make a mosaic mural. I believe all these stages helped me when deciding what to cover my plaster cast with. This idea led me to work on this new project simultaneously that connects in some ways. Experimentation and self-investigation led me here. Like I said before, sometimes my materials influence my ideas, and other times my ideas dictate my materials. As I work, I begin to forge connections. I begin to think about meaning, what the materials mean. I think of my own personal connection to the work, and they become sort of visual metaphors. For instance, this negative garment is representative of building on the past and weaving together experiences which influence the present and future. I like to think that my year at Mount College was not a waste. It came back into my artwork, and without my knowledge or understanding of garment design and drafting, I probably would not have constructed this negative film garment. None of my exploratory tangents have been wasted because they all come back in different ways. I want to encourage my students to feel comfortable taking risks and exploring ideas that arise. I want them to see how important the process is and to make discoveries of their own in the art room. My research and experiences led me to investigate a holistic approach to teaching, which encompasses the mind, body, and soul. This lesson, for example, started off with a banner, a large banner on each table, and a group of students with one palette of all different types of paint. And they were asked to use one finger to cover the entire page. And at first, they took their finger and kind of poked at the banner, very hesitant and timid. And then by the end of class, they were swimming in paint, they were covered in it, and they were having an absolute blast. And there was something very magical about that moment where I felt like they were experiencing what I have been, researching all about and have been trying to find in my own work. So back to that reflection at the beginning of this presentation. I hope that you understand why it's so important to me now. This reflection was done at the end of this year, and I think that it was really magical and rewarding to read some of these reflections reflections that were in third grade saying what I have been trying to communicate with them without telling them. So, thank you very much for listening.